So WCF is nothing but your Windows Communication Foundation, right? So which okay. So these are Windows Communication Foundation. So normally, why do we use WCF? Is mainly for distributed services. So distributed services is something where what you can do, you can actually create one business layer. So in 3-tier applications, right, if you see, so you will have one application layer, which is, let's say, application, when we say application layer, let's say it's an UI interface, right, which can be your, so a web page, right, or your desktop based application, right, or it can be your mobile app, anything. So your interface can be anything. So this can have the second layer called, let's say, web service, right, where it is actually talking to web service to get the details, and then let's say you have something called host like database or something. We'll actually see integration of everything, right? You have your application interface, you have the web service. Now your application is talking to web service. Now all the business logics and everything is applied here, right? Getting the data from databases, applying logics, and then whatever end output is there will be routed to your application. This is how it happens, right? So we have already seen this part, right, using console applications or web applications or different things, right? And we have already seen how to connect to database using ADOs, using entities, using modifying data, using link and everything, right? Now this is time where we have to learn distributed services, where what I can have is I can have multiple things in here like services, which is a web service, and one of the latest technology of Microsoft to create web services is WCF. So yeah, so we can have an interface, any user interface like web, desktop, or anything. So every type of interfacing application, right, can talk to web service. Now what exactly web service have an advantage is, now in your network related distributed services, right? Now when we say network related, let's take an example of let's say Facebook, right? So Facebook is initially a web enabled, right? So it was completely web enabled, and whatever feed you are getting, right? So log in anywhere, you'll actually get the same feed. So initially what happened in your application layer, which is a user interface itself, everything was written. Now, so once you want to enable it with mobile app, let's say, what happens? Mobile app, let's say mobile app, I'm talking about a native mobile app, right? So in a native mobile app, again, whatever logics have been written in user interface, again they have to rewrite it here in the mobile app. So that is something which is cumbersome. Instead of doing that, what we can do is we can actually make the main business logic, like getting a feed, adding a friend, right? Main business things, showing different yeah, what is that, meetings if you have, right, or any events if you have, everything you can actually make it, all the business related things in here. You can actually use your interface just to show the data. Now if you are making everything as a different module separately, I can use this web service, I can show it in any UI I want. It can be an application, web application, or a mobile app, right? So here what I'll do in web, I'll actually arrange my page so that I can show more details. But in mobile app, I can design my mobile app in such a way that I'm actually showing feed in part by part. Now that is something which is designing our mobile app, but actual data content which you're retrieving, I can actually part it in complete web service. That is how you can actually make your distributed services more handy, right? So that you don't have to completely depend on which interface you're actually using. So that's where your web services come, and you can actually use this in different ways. Fine. Now let's say there is one more use in here. Let's say you have developed a web service and you want to outsource your service to some other client, right? So then what you can do is you can actually host your web service in your secure servers like DMZ or your internet servers, and you can actually expose that service link to the clients so that they can consume the service link and you can provide some services. So these, even most of the companies do these services too, right? So in that way also you are actually checking out web service in a secure network related distributed services, right? So in this situation, so this is important that we learn how to actually develop a web service, right? And we will be using a latest technology in .NET, which is a WCF, which is a Windows Communication Foundation, right? And the main feature of WCF is to route, right? Remoting your, remoting your actual things to the outside world using a web service, right? So in this web service, WCF mainly, let's come to WCF mainly. We have three different components which actually plays a major role. One is service class. Service class is a main class where we have services set as a methods, right? Normally, creating a web service now in the latest versions of .NET is not a big deal actually. It's a very easy to create a service normally, creating a service and everything. But you have to make sure now this is all in your hands that what actually to create is something which is important, right? So in this service, when we say that actually, which means which component we can actually or which methods we can create wherever we want. That is important, which we have to understand. Right? So let's see that. Now here a service class can have all the set of methods which we normally call service methods, let's say, right? And then you have something called host methods, right? Which is something called host or hosted environments, right? So you can actually host your service class in in any way you want. Like let's say you can host your environment in IIS, which is a web server. You can host your environment in, let's say, simple console application itself. You can host your application, direct Windows application. When you are creating Windows, they can directly use your service and all, right? So we'll be checking out the web service which can be deployed on IIS, which means you can deploy it on IIS, and we'll see how to retrieve the URL, which is a service URL we normally call, and use it. That is a hosted environment. And the last component is your endpoints. So endpoints, anyways, is the actual communication we create. So the actual communication which happens through the web service is using your endpoints only, right? So where you can actually define your endpoints in your configurations to make sure the service which you are talking to is being is actually in place for with your application. So in endpoints we normally call, whenever we are using endpoints, right, we normally use endpoint consists of three parts mainly. So we normally call ABC endpoint. So in WCF this is a famous one. We normally use ABC's endpoints to communicate. Now ABC is nothing but A is an address, which is like a link URL of web service, and B is a binding, right, type of binding you want, and C is a contract. We'll see different contracts, how what different contracts we have in WCF. So WCF consists of complete contracts. There are no many contracts. We have few contracts which are very important to understand, right? And they are very simple contracts anyway. So contract will help mainly WCF to understand that, okay, what type of contract you are creating and what should it do to actually move the contract type and use the contract type for service communication. Right? So let's actually create a simple application of WCF application, and let's understand different contracts what we have. Right? So in my solution, let me create a simple. First, let me create a simple WCF application here. So you can see when you go to WCF, right, you can have many. Either you can create a service library or service application or workflow or anything you can use, right? Normally, if you want to create an application which can be used by multiple interfaces, right, you can create a WCF service application. When you can use a WCF, right? And also if you want to go, want to create any direct class library or anything, console library, and then you want to create your WCF service, you can do that. See, I can actually go to any service, let's say some service, sorry, some type of project and say add new item, and in this new item you can see there will be something called a WCF service, right? So WCF service will actually give you main service to actually get things in your this component service and talk to the same console library. This is something which you are actually hosting in your console library directly. Fine. So let's create first WCF application. Let me go to WCF service application and let me call it as WCF service. Let's call it as this. This is my business service, which is WCF business service and click on. Now this will create a WCF service to you. Now you can see there are few auto-generated things we have. So among them, among these things, right, we have few very important things to understand. One is I service. See here, I actually left the service as I service 1. Right? By default it will create an I service for you. Now let's see this one. So as soon as you create service, now if you want to create multiple, you can always go right click on this and add. You can see we have a direct, let's go to new item, right, where we have MVC, sorry, where go to SreeHub and you have something called WCF. So once you create CL with the extension SVC, right, your SVC is a main extension, right? As soon as you create any service, right, it will create two files for you. One, the main service file, which is your .cs. You can see in this service you will have your .cs mainly. This is your service exposed to outside world, right? And you have something called interface will be created, main interface. Now here we'll understand what are different contracts here. You can see in your each interface or your attribute, each attribute or any class you are creating, right? There are different contracts defined, and you can define your contracts as if you are defining your attributes of your different class or different variables here, right? Now let's start with interface, right? So here interface is the one where we are calling it as a service contract, which means this will give you the main skeleton of how and what the service is going to be. Like in this service one, which is interface, I'm saying that I will have a get data simple method. Now each method is called as an operation contract. In service contract, I will say service contract is a high level, right, where I'm mentioning that okay, my I service one is one service contract where I'll have different operations, and I'm going to return these operations in to the outside world. This is your service contract, and these are each operation in your interface we are talking about is something which is your operation contract. This is your complete skeleton you are creating for your service to be exposed outside the world, right? And if you come to the next one, see here, I can use something called data contract. So what is data contract? Data contract is nothing but, now let's say if you want to return some type of a class, right? Let's say you have some class and you want to actually return some class which is some object type, right? Which contains some variables, or like say variables and properties, right? And that you, anyways, we'll create some data contract, don't worry about it, right? You want to return something, then what you can use, you can actually use something called data contract. Now data contract will actually give you the actual data you are going to return. If you are returning some direct data types, then you don't need a data contract. But if you want to return any object type or any class object type, then yes, you need a data contract. So in data contract we will have multiple data members. So to the outside world this is not exposed, right? So what gets exposed is your data member, and each data member will have their own attributes. So this is a property, right, where it is encapsulated everything. Where you can see you have created a variables and you have created a data member. Now data member should be always a property. So these are, right, So there are 4 different contracts we have in service mainly, which is a service contract, operation contract, data contract, and a data member. Right now, so this interface, this service is a main interface which is like a skeleton you are creating for it. Now, the one which gets exposed to the outside world is this service, where you can see the image here, which is .svc service extension. Now, this is the one where we are going to actually define the methods where, let's say, so this service class will be implementing that interface, whatever we have defined it, right? So this interface will be implemented, which will actually force us to implement all the methods we have done. Now, see the first method, which is get data. So this get data is an operation contract, right, which is seeking a value called some integer value, and it returns string. Now in get data, you can see, as soon as I implement, I have to define my body of get data. Now what I'm doing, I'm just appending my value, whatever value I'm pushing, I'm just appending here. You entered so and so with value, and I'm actually returning it. This is a simple, method I have, right, where I'm actually showing this part. So this is a simple service which you have, right, and that's it. I mean, your service is almost ready. Now if you go to properties of your, let me just go to properties here of your server. Now you can see if you go to web, right, now in your local IS, you can see you already have your URL being posted. Now because I've created my WCF application, right, I'm using my local web server itself to deploy. Now as soon as I rebuild and publish, right, let's say it will directly create your service. Your services would have created, and you can actually use that directly here, right? So instead of using that directly from IS, let me create an application. Let me create a simple console application maybe first, and then we'll see how to create a WCF later, because we have to create more contracts in here. So let me create a new project of something called console application. Let me call it as WCF consumer something, right? Now here you have a WCF consumer. Yeah, let me create right. Now we know that my WCF consumer is the one where I can actually consume some service. Now, how can I consume any web service here? Now, this is not specific to that I'm actually consuming my same product web service, but let's see how I can actually consume in general. Now, in your references, right, what you can do, right click on the reference, and you have something called add service reference. Click on that. Now, this is a main wizard window where if you know any third-party web service or visitor link or anything, you can actually provide here, which is going to give you in that URL whatever services are deployed, you can give. Now first, let's say discover. When I click on discover, see, when you click on discover, whatever services are exposed to this maybe to this application, that will get automatically populated. Now you can see my 5073 port posted was my service, which is your WCF service base. And in this service, you can see there is one service called service1.svc, which you can see here. And you can see this is something which is talking to network to get everything. Now you can see we have one service, right? Now this is something which I have. Now you can see as soon as you click on add reference, you can see in your console application a new folder created, which is your service references, right? So this is your main service references folder. Now you can keep your namespace if you want service reference 1 to actually, because this is going to be main reference through which you can actually select your client. As of now we are actually creating a web service client, right? Web service main we have already created, which is a WCF service base. Now we are creating a service client here. Click on OK. Now if you want to go to advanced, you can actually go where you can select different things, right? How it is going to be. But let's keep everything as a default. and click on OK. So as soon as you click now, what it will do, it will import everything. See here. So this will import everything. The main library here is service model. Now your service model library is the one which drives your WCF in .NET. The main library. Even here you can see we have service model .NET. This is the main library or namespace we have, which actually on which WCF is driven, right? And in your services, you can see this is your service reference one. Now in your service reference one, this is important. See what happens now here. If you see, you have service one client. This is the class we are going to use, right? Now in your client, you can see there is get data, right? Get data using some data contact, whatever you have mentioned methods here, which is get data and so on, so you will get everything in here, right? Now let's see how we can actually get things to my console program. Now here, let us see how to consume. See, this is very easy how to consume your web service here. The only thing is we have to be careful in actually consuming web service and actually giving the service to the outside world. Now let me see how I can consume. Now I know that my namespace is service reference one dot. So the my main client is whatever your service name is there. Your service name appended with client will be your main class. Let me create something called, this is a service. Let me call it as service is equal to new. Right here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to call service dot, you have get data. See, get data with some value. Let's say I'm going to give some 25, right? And let's print this console dot write line to your get data. Right now here I'm actually consuming the service. See, I'm actually consuming the service. I'm actually pushing some parameters and I'm actually getting some output, and that output I'm printing. And after that, let's say you have a console dot. Right now, let's run this. See how it's going to work here. Now you can see you entered 25. So this is something which we got it from web service. So in web service, you can see whatever we are actually getting, right? I'm actually making as you entered and a parameter. And you can actually make this live, which when I say whatever I enter, right, I want to get the data for that. So here I'll say string, let's say some value is equal to have console dot write line of enter some number. Right? And let's say console dot read key. Right, or oops, right, console dot, let's say inside read key, let's say that's 5. Right, so as soon as you get it, let's pass that to. Now I'm going to pass this value. Right, now get data here will not accept this because get data, you can see it needs an integer value, right? So let's make this as int dot parse or this one. Fine, then I'm passing this. Fine, let's run this, and let's say if your var is 0, then break it up. So where I'm actually trying to consume, let's say I'm giving some number. Now here you can see it actually had a communication with web service, get the result, and then it published as a, right, give some other number. Now once your object is created, see, once your object is created, service object creation is something where your protocol will be set with service, and then it will give you whatever number you're entering. 0, right, enter 0. Right, enter 0. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, Now this is how we normally make our web service live. Now till now we have used only a method which was giving which was already there. So let's write a simple method for us. So how can we write? We actually can do in this way. So here in your contract, right? So let me just make one more contract. Let's say I'm gonna pass some string array. Now I'm going a bit higher. So let's say I'm going to do something called get something called cuts. Something I'm taking where I'm not going to pass anything. Now this I'm going to make an operation contract. As soon as I create an operation contract in my interface, if you go back to this and rebuild this, right? So this will give you an error that your interface getColors is your operation called getColors in interface is not being implemented. Right? So let's go ahead and implement that. Public string array. You have something. You have to take the same name, getColors, right? And open bracket and close bracket. So here, let's say I'm going to take some string array, return directly a string array, like let's say so outside. So this is something which will return you a string. Now, if it is not taken directly, let me just take a string array as right as val and right. So this will now what I did. I actually actually created a service, right? And we first created an operation contract here, right? And then we made it colors. So where you have this getColors here, and which returns a string array, right? And this we are actually taking it here. Now let me rebuild this. So when I rebuild this, it will be published by the latest one, right? But here you can see in my service contract here. Let me go to the service, go to this client. You can see the data is not there. getColors method is not there, right? So how can you do that? Right click on this and just say update reference. When you click on update reference here, right, see it will actually talk to the web service through the same link, right, and it will actually get you. Now let's go back here and so let me just remove this for loop, right, and this. Anyway, this is a number we have, and let's say you're going to get a string array called colors is equal to we have service dot get colors, right, and then let's print them, which is colors here. And on this. So it is for the number here. Now you can see you are getting your actual things back to your which is blue that we have. Now this is something which is kind of you are actually getting things directed to here. Right? Now this is how we normally create our actual outputs, creating an operation contract first, right, and then creating your service, right, service method here, right. As soon as you create any method here, it will actually take it as a service method, and you're returning as per your you have defined your template, which is a skeleton template here, right. So this is how we normally create the data. Now let's see, let's integrate this with our MVC, right, and see how we can actually get the data. Now anyways, we have already created something called MVC data, right. Now see, I already have MVC entry data library where I have already used my college model. Let me reuse this library. How can I use? Let's give this MVC entry data reference to your WCF service base, right. Let me right click on this and say add reference in my projects, let me click on MVC entity data and click on OK. Now your MVC data is ready, right? Now here what I'm going to do, let me go to iService contract and let me create one more string array. We'll see the data contract part tomorrow, right? So that's the reason why I'm actually creating all data types. So here let me call it as get student names, right? Which is my operation contract, right? And the same method I will have to create in my service. So here let me create, it should be public, right, with the same defined return type and this. Here, see how can I get. So I have MVC, let me import my MVC entity data. So in MVC data I have my college DB context, right? So I can use this context. Now, once I start using this context, you can see I'm using some other library in my WCF service. So this same as the reference which you give in other project types, right? So here I'll say my DB context dot students dot to list, right? So dot let's say it's giving some var two, right? So this is actually providing my students. I'll say dot so here this will actually give me the list of students, let's say. So let me create for each loop of the students, right, where let's say I'm going to, it needs a string array, right? So let me create a string array here. Let's say it has a result is equal to new string array of, now let's say you have a stu dot, I will get the length, let's say I'm trying to make it as some 20 students. So we'll actually get the actual size here. So let's say I'm going to add a result, of, so let me take the integers here, that is equal to 0. Anyways, that's the reason why we normally go for contracts, data contracts. We create a data contract and then actually directly get it. So let's say I++ is equal to item dot something for student name. Now let's make this var as list of student, right? Here I'm going to take this as here. So let me make it as a student object directly. So I can directly call student dot student name, let's say, right? And it actually returns. So this is a stu. So let's take this. Let me just call it dot. You have length or count, right? So you can take this variable to define your size. Fine. Now this is how we got this, and let's return the result. Right? We got a DB context when we got all the students. We actually made it typecasted to list of students because we are getting the student update and we are getting the result. Right? And I defined my result array, which is string array of so much of count, how many, so whatever students list I have, I updated, and then I'm looking through to load it to my string array and return it. Now this is my new operation contract I've created, right? Let me rebuild my WCF application here, and it says what it says. Okay, so this is a reference you have to provide. We are actually using that, right? Okay, we are not giving the entity. Let me just yep, we have to install your entity nugget packages. The first step we have to do, because we are going to use my DB context actual objects here, right? So it has to be referenced with entity. So let's do that. Install that. right? And one more thing, when we are using this library here, so two things we have to make sure. I'm actually giving a reference to my WCF with the entity data, right? But you can see my entity data is actually using a connection string called DB context, right? So even this reference I have to use. If you remember, if you're using any class library with an application, any application, right, can be web or console, anything, you have to make sure. So even your WCF will have a config, right? And in your config, so we'll actually get to these. You'll have something called, if you don't have connection strings, then you'll have to create one. Now, in your connection strings, which is under your system, here your entity framework here, and you have your config sections inside your connection strings. Right? Let me copy this and let me give it anywhere in config sections, right? Because in config section, you have it under the configuration you have. So let me just give this anywhere here. This is my connection string, which I have actually provided to my entity. So let me run this now. Oopsie. So we have to go back. It says generic list. So here, as soon as I add it, right, now this is something which is my DB set. Now, as I didn't add my entity library here, we just added it, right, nugget package, right? So that will make the students, now the DB set is understandable now, and I can actually directly convert my DB set to two lists. So previously it was not getting because we didn't add the nugget package, right? Now you have your contract ready, right? So let me rebuild this WCF service. Now we have it ready. Now let's go to consumer here. Now you can see I don't have my get student detail here. Let me right click on this and update service reference. Right now you get a get student name or names. That's fine, right? Now go back here and let's create console.writeLine. Right, and you have something called, let me take a string array. Here I'm going to take students is equal to, you have service dot get student names, right? And you have your for each group on this and a string console dot write line of your file. Right, so this is it. Now let's run this program. Now let me enter some number. You can see your service object created, and you can see you have this. Now you can see as soon as you got your object, right, it will talk to entity libraries, it will talk to database, and you will got it. Now you can see through web service you are able to get all the details here. Now you can understand that your web service can do, right, read database, get all the details, and it will actually give you everything to your interface there. Now it is all about you, that how you want to arrange here, right? So when we see the same thing tomorrow, we'll see how to integrate this with our WCF, sorry, MVC, right, and get the things to your controller, or map everything to your model and then get it to your controller and map it to view. We'll see this part tomorrow, right? So how we are going to map it. And tomorrow we'll also see the data contract, where instead of actually dumping, or returning data in this way, right, which is your direct data types, we'll see how to create a data contracts and create a properties of that and then return it to UI, so that I will get more details in here, right? So this is how we create a WCF service and consume details in here, right? So this is about WCF, creation and deployment. We'll see the deployment. We can also deploy this in our AD port if you want, in our IIS. We will see that part, and we'll see how to consume it directly in our tomorrow. So we'll see deployment of web service on IIS, right, and how to consume that in MVC and map the details to website, right? So that part we'll see tomorrow.